I call the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure to order, and the first order of business is to recognize Mr. Ray Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since our full committee last met, the Democratic caucus on our side has reorganized, and I want to congratulate several of our members. As we all know, Peter DeFazio has been elected as the ranking member of the Committee on Natural Resources, position I once held, and as a full committee ranking member and pursuant to Democratic caucus rules, he can no longer serve as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit. Therefore, we have the our esteemed colleague from the District of Columbia, Eleanor Holmes Norton, has been elected to that position by the committee's Democratic caucus, and Andre Carson has been elected as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Economic Development. So I want to congratulate both of these individuals on behalf of our caucus and welcome them in their new positions. Look forward to continuing to work with them, and that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member, and also offer my congratulations to Mr. DeFazio for his new role, and also Ms. Norton, who I worked with on the Subcommittee on Public Buildings, Emergency Management, and Economic Development. Congratulations. And, of course, Mr. Carson. It's good to have him taking up the lead on that side, so thank you. Today, the committee will consider H.R. 3096, a bill to designate the building occupied by the Federal Bureau of Investigation located at 801 Follin Lane in Vienna, Virginia, as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center. Also, H.R. 3095, a bill to ensure that any new or revised requirements providing for the screening, testing, or treatment of individuals operating commercial motor vehicles for sleep disorders is adopted pursuant to a rulemaking proceeding and for other purposes. And the third thing we'll consider is H.R. 3080, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013. With that, I recognize Mr. Barletta for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 3096 would designate the building occupied by the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Terrorist Screening Center as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center. Supervisory Special Agent Michael Resnick dedicated his 20 years of service with the FBI to protecting our nation. Pursuant to Rule 1A1 of the Rules of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, I move that the Chairman be authorized to declare recesses during today's markup.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Our first order of business is to consider H.R. 3096, a bill to designate the building occupied by the FBI located at 801 Follin Lane, Virginia, Vienna, Virginia, as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, Emergency Management, and call up H.R. 3096, and that the bill be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the Subcommittee Chairman, Mr. Barletta, to explain the bill.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 3096 would designate the building occupied by the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Terrorist Screening Center as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center. Supervisory Special Agent Michael Resnick dedicated his 20 years of service with the FBI to protecting our nation. He demonstrated his dedication to protecting us all from terrorism as he continued to work while fighting pancreatic cancer. Sadly, he passed away in 2011. I think that it is more than fitting to name the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center after him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now recognize Mr. Ray Hall for a statement on the bill.
I recognize our Subcommittee Chairman, Ranking Member, Mr. Andre Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be here today in the markup in my role as the Ranking Member of the Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management Subcommittee in the footsteps of the legendary Eleanor Holmes Norton. Yesterday, I participated in my first hearing as Ranking Member, presiding over a hearing on FEMA recovery that was rewarding and very informative, Mr. Chairman. We now turn to another set of new duties, shepherding bills through markup that fall under the committee's jurisdiction. I echo the earlier comments of Chairman Barletta with respect to the bipartisan H.R. 3096, which designates the building occupied by the FBI located at 801 Follin Lane as the Michael D. Resnick Terrorist Screening Center. Supervisory Resnick had over 20 years as an FBI agent, which highlighted his senior service in the White House, where he was a prominent person in leading the presidential review by watch-listing policies and procedures in the aftermath of the failed terrorist bombing of 2009. Agent Resnick was a well-respected public servant who passed away in 2011 as a result of pancreatic cancer. And this naming designation is supported by the building and will stay with the building for as long as the FBI occupies the facility. The name designation of the FBI Terrorist Screening Center is a fitting tribute to Agent Resnick, his exemplary career as an FBI agent, and his dedication to developing the architecture of a government-wide watch listing of terrorism suspects. As a former law enforcement officer, I especially appreciate the contributions of Agent Resnick, and I urge all of my colleagues to support this important legislation. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. And do any other members wish to be recognized for statements on the pending measure? Seeing none, we will consider the bill for amendment. Are there any amendments? No amendments. I recognize Mr. Barletta for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 3096 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying no. Nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. We'll now take up H.R. 3095, a bill to ensure that any new or revised requirement providing for the screening, testing, or treatment of individuals operating commercial motor vehicles for sleep disorders is adopted pursuant to the rulemaking proceeding and for other purposes. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Highways, Transit, and call up H.R. 3095, and that the bill be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Without any objection, so ordered. I recognize Subcommittee Chairman Petri to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to support the bill before us, H.R. 3095. It ensures that any new or revised requirements made by the Secretary for the screening, testing, or treatment of commercial motor vehicle drivers for obstructive sleep apnea is adopted through a rulemaking process. The bill does not require a rulemaking process to be initiated. It only requires that any future changes to screening, testing, or treatment requirements for obstructive sleep apnea are made through a formal rulemaking. A rulemaking will help stakeholders and Congress understand the costs and benefits of the proposed changes and give stakeholders an opportunity to comment. The bill is the most responsible way to move forward with potential changes to obstructive sleep apnea screening, testing, or treatment requirements, and I would urge my colleagues to support the bill.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize Mr. Rahal for a statement on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no objection to this bill. There's little question that obstructive sleep apnea, if left untreated, can significantly affect a truck or bus driver's on-the-job performance. I fully support the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's efforts to get to the bottom of this condition, to better diagnose and treat those truck and bus drivers who suffered from it, and to improve safety. However, the agency is proposing major changes to the medical screening process for hundreds of thousands of commercial drivers. I believe such a sweeping change deserves to go through the full rulemaking process. I support this bill and urge its adoption.
Thank the gentleman. And now I would like to recognize the ranking member on the subcommittee, Ms. Holmes-Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I strongly support this bill. 22 million Americans suffer from sleep apnea. Many of them, I'm afraid, are truck drivers. But, Mr. Chairman, I understand that the FMCSA has committed to issuing a notice to address obstructive sleep apnea. I'm reading from their notice, through the formal rulemaking process after collecting and analyzing the necessary data and research. So I think that the action of the committee has already produced the result we intended. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. I'd now like to recognize one of the authors of this bipartisan legislation, Mr. Bouchon from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 3095 is a simple piece of legislation that has potential to save our trucking industry nearly $1 billion. As was just stated, FMCSA has recently said that they will follow through with rulemaking rather than guidance, but I still believe this bill is necessary to codify Congress's opinion on this issue. The problem with issuing guidance instead of traditional rulemaking is that guidance is non-binding and open to interpretation. When somebody with a commercial driver's license goes to a doctor to get a physical, the doctor can follow the guidance and recommend a sleep apnea test. Sleep apnea tests cost thousands of dollars, and the cost would be shifted to the employer or the driver. If the doctor chooses to ignore the guidance, they would possibly be open to legal action. I know this from experience as a physician that many physicians already practice defensive medicine, and any guidance related to this issue would only drive up the cost of medicine and potentially hurt an industry that also already faces high unemployment. The American Trucking Association estimates that nearly one-third of their drivers would meet the arbitrary body mass index threshold. That would mean an estimated 1 million drivers getting sleep apnea tests at an average cost of $2,265. The total cost just to the ATA members is estimated between $900 million and $1.2 billion. The School Bus Association estimates that this regulation would cost their drivers over $100 million. Sleep apnea is a serious disease that can't be diagnosed arbitrarily, and I'm glad to see that DOT is planning to go through the rulemaking process. This would allow a cost-benefit analysis and get input from medical providers and industry stakeholders. The bill has widespread bipartisan support. I'd like to thank my colleague, Mr. Lipinski, for co-authoring this bill with me and the Transportation Committee with their assistance in support of this legislation. I urge all of my colleagues to support this bill. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Do any other members wish to be heard on this amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. DeFazio.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As the former ranking and former chair of the subcommittee jurisdiction here, I've got to say that we have had problems in past directives from FMCSA. They don't always get things exactly right. And I think in this case, the authors of the bill and the committee played a very productive role. I think guidance had the potential to create tremendous confusion, unnecessary cost, and be wrapped up in litigation for years to come. So it appears that we've already had the desired effect, but I still think the legislation is necessary since that's the only thing that triggered them to take this reasonable course of a formal rulemaking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize the co-author of this legislation, bipartisan legislation, Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you and Ranking Member Ray Hall for holding this morning's markup. And I'd like also to commend Mr. Gibbs and Bishop for your efforts and move forward a water resources bill. It's been a bipartisan process with member input on both sides. It reminds me of the way that things have been in the past in this committee. Hopefully we can continue those things. And right now I just want to speak in strong support of this bill, H.R. 3095, with Dr. Bouchon and I introduced last week. It's great working with Dr. Bouchon as chairman of the subcommittee that I'm ranking member on the Science Committee. We work very well together. This is a important issue. As Mr. Bouchon has stated, and Chairman or Representative DeFazio has also talked about this bill, about requiring the Department of Transportation to carry out a formal rulemaking process should it decide to regulate screening and testing for obstructive sleep apnea and other sleep disorders for drivers of commercial motor vehicles. We learned, as you've talked about already, we've learned through the press that the Department now plans to undertake the formal rulemaking process. So while I appreciate the Department's responsiveness to this markup, passing this bill will ensure there simply is no confusion over this. I think we need to move forward with this, but it's amazing how quickly things can work when both sides are working together. We're moving this bill forward, introduced the bill last week, as I said, moving in markup this week, and we get the response from DOT this morning. And hopefully we can have a few more of these where we can work together and get things done that quickly. But again, I thank everyone for their support of this bill. I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, we'll now consider the bill for amendment. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, I recognize Mr. Petri for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 3095 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
The question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. Now we will take up H.R. 3080, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment to call up H.R. 3080 and that the bill be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. Well, I'm proud to be here today to considering one of the highest priorities as a chairman of the committee today on H.R. 3080, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013, or WRRDA. We have worked together in a bipartisan way on this bill since day one, developed this bill with input from members, stakeholders, listening sessions, roundtables, and hearings. I want to thank my partners and original co-sponsors, Ranking Member Nick Rahal, Water Subcommittee Chairman Bob Gibbs, and Water Subcommittee Ranking Member Tim Bishop for all their efforts in working together on the Act. I want to thank all the members of the committee and all the staff for their hard work and desire to work together on this important infrastructure and reform legislation. I'm also proud that WRRDA has received more than 70 letters of support from stakeholders. This bill is about strengthening our infrastructure so we can remain competitive. It's about economic growth, and it's about the jobs, not just the construction jobs, but the jobs in the future that will yield from being able to have trade more efficiently move in and out of this country. Congress has not enacted a WRRDA bill since 2007, and we can't afford delay. Without improvements, our water transportation system becomes more obsolete every day, and we become less competitive. This WRRDA is the most policy and reform-focused legislation of its kind in the last 2 decades. The new name reflects the landmark reforms. The extra R we put into stands for reform. Our bill cuts red tape, reforms the bureaucracy, accelerates project delivery. It sets hard deadlines on time and cost of studies. It also consolidates or eliminates unnecessary studies and requires concurrent reviews. And our bill streamlines environmental reviews. It does not remove environmental reviews. It streamlines environmental reviews. And the top priority of this Act was to be fiscally responsible, and the WRRDA deauthorizes $12 billion of old, inactive projects that were authorized prior to current law and fully offsets new authorizations. In addition, it also sunsets new authorizations to prevent future backlogs. And WRRDA has no earmarks. The first time there's been a WRRDA bill with no earmarks, and I can tell you it was very, very difficult to do. Our bill establishes a new, transparent process for future bills to review and prioritize water resource development activities with strong congressional oversight and without, again I emphasize, without Congress handing over its authority to the executive branch. We have been recognized by leading outside watchdog groups for having a bill with no earmarks and for keeping congressional oversight without ceding authority to the Corps or the executive branch. I'm extremely proud of this accomplishment, and we all should be. We should all, as members of Congress, should make sure that we stop this giving the executive branch our authority to us granted by the Constitution, not only for ourselves as an institution, but for the American people. We're the body elected by the people, and we should make sure we hold on and fiercely defend our congressional authority, constitutional authority. WRRDA breaks down barriers that hold back the development of our water resources infrastructure. WRRDA maximizes the ability of non-federal interests to contribute their own funds to move studies and projects forward. It also expands the ability of non-federal interests to contribute funds to expedite the evaluation and processing of permits. And it establishes a public-private partnership program for water infrastructure, that effort was led by Rodney Davis from Illinois. It improves competitiveness. This bill improves our ability to compete for authorizing needed investments in America's ports. Our bill supports our underserved and emerging ports to also help them become more competitive. And WRRDA reforms and preserves the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and the Inland Waterway Trust Fund to better ensure that fees collected from the users of these systems are utilized for their intended purpose. And I want to thank my colleague from California, Ms. Hahn, for her leadership on this, having many of us out to the Port of Los Angeles, Long Beach, making us aware of some of the inequities that exist there, so I thank her for her leadership on that. These are all important and necessary reforms, but at its heart, WRRDA ensures we don't lose sight of the importance of strong infrastructure. Our bill supports our water transportation network. which is the lowest cost form to move goods around this country and around the world, and to keep American competitive, provide a foundation for growth, and foster a more robust economy. And I want to stress, my goal as chairman, I don't want to speak for the ranking member, but I believe we both support doing WRRDA bills every Congress, get back to the regular order so that we're not allowing these things to languish out there. So again, I look forward to the discussion in the committee today. I ask all members of the committee, Republicans and Democrats, to join me in supporting the bill. And now I recognize the subcommittee chairman, Mr. Gibbs, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, H.R. 3080, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2013, is all about economic growth and job creation by providing an efficient system to move our commerce and our exports. This bill is heavy in policy reform, focused piece of legislation related to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It cuts costs by cutting the time to get the projects going. H.R. 3080 is a bipartisan bill that was developed by working across the aisle to achieve a common goal of investing in America's future. H.R. 3080 contains no earmarks, cuts the Federal red tape, streamlines the project delivery process, and strengthens our water transportation networks to promote competitiveness, prosperity, and economic growth. This bill is fiscally responsible by fully offsetting new project authorizations with deauthorizing old, inactive projects. This bill establishes a path forward for enacting a WRRDA bill every 2 years without conceding any of our congressional authority to the executive branch. This committee held numerous listening sessions and public roundtables and official hearings in developing this legislation virtually the last 3 years. We have heard from the public, industry, stakeholders, and from our colleagues in Congress while developing this legislation to incorporate their ideas into H.R. 3080. Too often, we literally study projects to death. H.R. 3080 accelerates the Corps of Engineers study delivery process. It sets hard deadlines to get the projects done and sets a cap on the cost of the projects. For example, it requires the Corps at the district level, at the regional level, and at the D.C. level to work collaboratively during the process to talk to each other and do it instead of doing it consecutively. Too often, non-federal interests and their contributions are forced to sit at the sidelines while our international competitors race past us. H.R. 3080 empowers non-federal interests and ensures projects will be completed faster and cheaper with local support. Too often, resources from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund are diverted to activities unrelated to keeping our U.S. ports competitive in a global marketplace. H.R. 3080 creates an incentive to spend the funds for their intended purpose in a manner that all ports agree upon. And one of the most important elements of this legislation, it ensures the legislative branch engages in the Water Resources Development Act process at least once every Congress. I appreciate Chairman Shuster, Ranking Member Rahal, and Ranking Subcommittee Chairman Bishop, bipartisan work to address the vital needs of America. By working together, this committee has accomplished that many have said cannot be done, produce an authorization bill for the Army Corps of Engineers without earmarks. As the Chairman said, numerous groups and entities are in very much support of this bill, all the way from the barge operators, people that transport on the inland waterway system, all the way from the ports around the country, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and many of virtually all their members, the American Farm Bureau, and numerous entities are in strong support of this bill because they know this is a bill that moves us forward to keep us globally competitive and enhance our competitiveness and create jobs and create a growing economy. In order to get these needed reforms in place to establish a new process for future authorizations, I urge all members to support H.R. 3080. I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I appreciate all his hard work and effort on this bill. I now recognize Ranking Member Rahal for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do commend you for bringing the 2013 Water Resources Reform and Development Act, H.R. 3080, before our committee today. This bill is a product of many hours of discussion and dialogue with stakeholders, the public, and members. You have been very encompassing in your approach. You have involved the stakeholders, the public. You've involved members on both sides of the aisle. I commend you, Mr. Chairman. I commend Subcommittee Chairman Mr. Gibbs. I commend your staffs for working and reaching across the aisle to our staff. And all around, this, I hope, will bode well for the future direction of this committee on other important and vital pieces of legislation. This bill presents a much-needed path forward to give the Army Corps of Engineers clear direction to meeting their mission objectives, reform their practices, and as a result, create jobs and improve our economy. This is a different type of WRRDA bill than those we have developed in the past because of the challenges of declining budgets, limits on congressionally directed projects, and an escalating need for fixing our aging water infrastructure. We have had a significant challenge. While this bill does not meet all of our needs and still leaves some areas of concern with project implementation, it does represent an example of when provided an opportunity, a mutually acceptable piece of legislation can be crafted. I want to congratulate the members on both sides of the aisle, some of whose bills have been incorporated herein, but many more of the ideas from members on both sides of the aisle have been incorporated in this legislation. Most importantly, I congratulate members on both sides for putting aside our differences and working to develop a bill that I think achieves a collaboration that moves management of our rivers, canals, and inland waterways in a positive direction. One particular individual I would like to single out and especially commend is our subcommittee ranking member, Mr. Tim Bishop. Mr. Bishop has worked extremely hard on this legislation, has been extremely patient, and is extremely knowledgeable of every aspect of this bill. So thank you, Tim, for your tremendous work, and all members of our committee owe you deep gratitude as well. Let me be clear before I shut up that H.R. 3080 is just a starting point. I think each of us recognize that this is just the starting point to the continual work that is needed to meet the water challenges facing our nation. So again, Mr. Chairman, I commend you and Subcommittee Chairman Gibbs for your leadership, your willingness to work with us to craft a bill that we can support and of which we can be proud. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And now let me pile on with some of those accolades. Mr. Bishop has done a great job of representing your side of the aisle and negotiating very hard. Also, I'd like to mention he's a very, very fine third baseman, much to my detriment, which came up in negotiations a few times. But with that, I'd like to recognize the distinguished gentleman from New York.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you and the ranking member for your kind words. And the next time you hit a ground ball to me, Bill, I may move a little more slowly, and we'll see what happens. As others have noted, this is a good bill. It's not the bill that my caucus would have written on its own, and I'm sure it's not the bill that the Republican caucus would have written on its own. It is, however, a bill that reflects the better traditions of this committee and a bill that moves us forward. And for this, I would like to express my public thanks to Chairman Shuster, Chairman Gibbs, and Ranking Member Rahal for deciding early on that this committee would produce a better bill if it started from a blank sheet of paper and where all parties had the opportunity to actively participate in its creation. That is how this committee was so often successful in the past, how it can continue to be effective going forward as we deal with larger and more complex issues, and it should be the model on how the rest of the Congress should operate. This bill also shows that Congress can still work together on a bipartisan basis and get things done when it chooses to do so. Most importantly, this bill is about the creation of jobs. Not only those good construction jobs that will come with the authorization of chiefs reports contained in the bill, but also those jobs associated with the movement of goods through our nation's large and small ports and our inland waterways systems, those jobs associated with the overall renewal of our nation's water-related infrastructure, as well as those jobs associated with protecting and restoring physical and natural assets in our communities. Much has been said already about what is contained in this bill, but I would like to highlight a few items. First, the legislation starts to address the growing backlog of unauthorized chiefs reports that have been submitted to Congress for authorization but cannot proceed to construction without congressional approval. Several of these chiefs reports, including projects for the restoration of the Florida Everglades and the Louisiana coastal area, have languished in Congress for over 4 years, and it is long past time for Congress to allow these projects to proceed to construction. Second, this bill addresses several pending cost increases for ongoing construction projects that would be forced to shut down unless Congress approves these increases. I am pleased that these were included because in many cases the Federal Government would have needlessly wasted millions of dollars in demobilization costs had we failed to act, yet these projects would have remained unfinished. In addition, thanks to the hard work of the Chairman and the Ranking Member, this bill represents an opportunity for Congress to reassert its role in prioritizing those projects and studies undertaken by the Corps of Engineers. When this Chamber instituted an earmark moratorium at the beginning of the last Congress, it essentially ceded the authority to decide which Corps projects and studies could move forward to the executive branch. In addition, by the Congress's failure to authorize new projects and studies through the water resources development process, it has failed to address those emerging and ongoing water resource challenges facing our communities and our crumbling water-related infrastructure. This bill, if enacted, would again allow us, the locally elected officials, to make the decisions on how best to provide for and protect our constituents. Mr. Chairman, this legislation will also provide some relief to the challenges facing the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and the Inland Waterways Trust Fund. Over the past few years, the subcommittee has held numerous hearings and roundtables on the challenges facing these navigation funds, which ironically are facing the exact opposite problems, one with a growing surplus of unspent harbor maintenance collections and the other with insufficient resources to address ongoing inland waterways construction projects. However, because of these challenges, our nation's coastal and inland waterways are performing far below their expected levels and are having significant short and long-term implications on our national, regional, and local economies and global competitiveness. To be clear, this legislation does not solve the challenges facing these two trust funds, and more work remains, which I know that the Chairman and other members of the committee are committed to undertake. This committee must remain vigilant that the changes proposed in the bill do not further erode the ability of the Corps to carry out construction projects, such as those necessary to meet the post-Panamax vessels that will come once the Panama Canal expansion is complete. This bill does, as I said earlier, move us forward and should be supported. Finally, there are some provisions in this bill that my caucus did not advocate for inclusion, and there are some issues of great importance to our members that were not included in the final draft as well. On these issues, we are encouraged by the Chairman's commitment to work with us in good faith as this bill moves its way to the President's desk. For that reason, and in support of the Chairman's ongoing effort to work with all stakeholders on this bill, I support the bill, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill as well. Again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Do any other members wish to make a statement? Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Gibbs, Ranking Members Ray Hall and Bishop. This is a critical piece of work by this committee. It is a return to the idea that we may have some differences about policy that surrounds infrastructure, but the critical need for infrastructure investment is very much a bipartisan issue here in Washington, D.C. I particularly want to congratulate the negotiators on the 10% set aside from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund for critical dredging at small ports. I have ports that I have one port that actually is essentially going dry. They take the boats out of the water at high tide onto a special dock, and they're at the point now where they can't even get the boats in unless we have a high tide. Yet in the past, I was able to get these ports dredged with earmarks, and I'd be happy to go back to the earmark process, but we're not doing that here, so we're going to do it in regular order, and that's fine with me. I don't fault the Corps for their cutoff of dredging on small ports. They are woefully underfunded, and we're dealing with a $60 billion national backlog of critical projects. This bill will begin to address that by freeing up or actually implementing the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund as a trust fund, and that is tremendous progress. Finally, I do have areas where I disagree, as Mr. Bishop mentioned, and as the Ranking Member on the Resources Committee, I do need to raise some concerns about some of the provisions on environmental streamlining. Essentially, it seems like this is a modified version of streamlining that was negotiated in MAP 21 when I was Ranking Member in the last Congress, and I'm not confident that these really fit Corps projects the same way they fit surface transportation projects. The limits on timelines for feasibility studies, some of these core projects, we should distinguish between core projects which are maintenance, repair, routine or smaller, and massive projects in terms of what streamlining we might apply. In this case, the streamlining is applied indiscriminately across both the largest new potentially initiated projects and to the most routine of replacement, say replacing a lock or something like that. So I believe that we could have done this in a more targeted manner. The Senate bill did have a sunset on their streamlining provisions. Hopefully that will be adopted in the conference, and then we can see whether and how these streamlining provisions work in the near future. So with that, Mr. Chairman, again, for the most part, I'm very pleased with the bill. Reserve concerns in those areas, but I consider it a work in progress. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Now I recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank yourself and the T&I committee staff for working with my legislative director, Brittany Preston, and I on this bill, and for committing to requesting a study on the way the Corps handles water storage pricing. As cities and municipalities struggle with water supply and storage shortages due to drought, city growth, and other things, it is imperative we make sure the cost of additional water is at an attainable rate. My hope is that this study will shed some light on some pricing issues and help us better understand how to help municipalities ensure their citizens have enough water in the future. Thank you once again, and I look forward to voting for this bill. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma for all your hard work and effort on this and bringing real-world experience to the committee, so thank you for that. Next, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking you, Ranking Member Rahal, Chairman Gibbs, and Ranking Member Bishop, for all of your hard work in developing a WRRDA bill that the committee can mark up in a bipartisan manner. The bill is a very good bill. It is not perfect. It does not contain earmarks. I regard that as unfortunate, and I hope that one day Congress will reassert its constitutional duty to determine the proper uses of public funds and not leave those decisions to the executive branch. I also have concerns about the environmental streamlining sections. Most of us would agree that there are common sense things we should do to advance projects in an efficient manner, but limiting public input is not one of them. The best thing we can do to expedite projects is to ensure there is agreement among stakeholders and identify problems early, which is one of the main benefits of the NEPA process. The real obstacle to most of these projects is not the environmental review process, but a lack of adequate funding. So I would urge my colleagues to support increased funding for core construction and for infrastructure generally if we really want to move these projects forward. I am pleased that the bill increases the amount authorized for harbor maintenance. As the ranking member of the committee's Special Freight Panel, I have been working with the panel, and we have been looking into the subject very closely, and this is an area where there seems to be relatively widespread agreement. But we need to ensure that increasing funding in harbor maintenance does not adversely impact funding for the Army Corps construction account. That's an issue that falls within the jurisdiction of other committees as well, but I hope that we are all united toward increasing appropriations for the Army Corps. I also support the language allowing for expanded use of harbor maintenance funds and would like to see us go even further on that front, but this bill is a very good start in that respect. I am concerned that we are not doing enough to prepare for climate change, rising sea levels, and extreme weather events. Just this month, Colorado was hit by a 1,000-year flood. Less than a year ago, Superstorm Sandy devastated the East Coast. These are just two of the most recent examples in a growing trend of natural disasters that is costing taxpayers tens of billions of dollars per year, not to mention the tremendous cost imposed on businesses, the insurance industry, and individuals. Whether or not you believe these events are linked to global warming, the fact is that more extreme weather events are happening more often, and we would be fools not to act upon that information. I am thankful that the bill includes a provision requiring the Army Corps to make specific project recommendations as part of the study funded in the Sandy Supplemental to examine how to reduce the risk of flood and storm damage along the North Atlantic coast, but we should do much more and on a national scale. The Senate WRRDA bill includes a nationwide study on how to reduce risk from future extreme weather events, and I hope that it will be retained in the final conference report. I have some questions about the new process set up to deauthorize projects, so that is also a matter for further discussion as the bill moves through the legislative process. Congress is long overdue in reauthorizing these critical infrastructure projects. Given the current situation in the House, this bill is probably the best we can hope for right now if we want to move a bipartisan bill. I'm grateful for the progress we have made, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to explore these issues and hopefully to improve the bill as it moves through the process. And again, I want to thank the Chairman and the Ranking Member of the committee and the subcommittee for their hard work and successful work on this issue. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I'd like to recognize Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As we begin the markup for this Water Resources Reform and Development Act, or WRRDA, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, our ranking member, Mr. Rahal, the subcommittee chairman, Mr. Gibbs, and subcommittee ranking member, Mr. Bishop, for their leadership and diligence on this water bill. I was the chairwoman of the Water Resources Subcommittee during the previous bill, which was in 2007, and understand how much work is required to assemble a water piece of legislation. I truly appreciate the efforts of the chairman, of the ranking member, and the ranking members of this legislation. I requested the inclusion of channel improvement projects on the Sabine-Natchez Waterway and for Freeport Harbor, and I'm pleased to say the 2 Texas projects authorized in this bill. Both of these projects in the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway play an important role in maritime commerce in Texas. In turn, the maritime commerce and ports in Texas play a vital role to our national economy and its recovery. And I'll say on the side, I don't think this is really earmarking. While future legislation is needed to reach more equitable port funding, this legislation does take a step in the right direction for our ports and maritime commerce. Texas has and will continue to be a national leader in this realm. I'm also pleased to see language in the bill that enables non-federal project sponsors to receive credit for contributions to water resources development projects that are in excess of the non-federal cost sharing. Also, this bill includes the groundwork for innovative financing mechanisms via the Water Infrastructure Public-Private Partnership Program, and I hope this program will be applied in Texas and Dallas in particular, where there is much opportunity and demonstrated success with public-private partnerships in different realms of transportation infrastructure. And as I close, let me say that I appreciate the fact that I had 2 Texans that joined me on this committee, and I appreciate the fact that I had the opportunity to work with them, Mr. Williams and Mr. Farenthold. In closing, I want to once again thank the committee leadership and their staffs and for their hard work, and also thank my colleagues on the committee for working together on this bill. It might be a landmark bill for this particular Congress, and I thank you again. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Now recognize Ms. Holmes Norton for a statement.
Mr. Chairman, you and Ranking Member Rahal and Chairman Gibbs and Ranking Member Bishop have done nothing less than an amazing breakthrough. We have not had a WRRDA bill in 6 years. They were supposed to come out every 2 years, and you have had to virtually invent a new process to get it done. You have my thanks and my congratulations at a time when I don't believe we can afford to neglect our water infrastructure. I do have some compunctions about the environmental streamlining. I happened, having served heading an agency in the federal government and where my tenure will be remembered for streamlining, I want to indicate that I do not oppose streamlining as such. I have some concerns as to our failure to come to grips with, perhaps do what is necessary to discover what the delays have been in the WRRDA bill in particular. For example, it seems just as likely that the delays in that bill could have come from the huge backlog that this bill is seeking to address from the funding limitations that are so well known, and from poor project planning and and design. So what we have done is to essentially impose deadlines on the environmental process throughout. And my question would be, based on what data? My concern with these deadlines and the fines that attend them is that the kind of consensus that is often necessary on environmental matters will not be achieved, and you may well have rubber stamping of unacceptable projects just to avoid the deadline fines by the agency. I think we have to watch closely this process to see how it works. I regard it as almost experimental so that we can pinpoint where the delays were and what the results of this particular streamlining will be. I am very concerned that in the face of what are unprecedented climate changes, the kinds of storms, floods, droughts, where we least expect them, call for the most careful kind of environmental analysis. It's us against nature now, and we know very little. Having said that, Mr. Chairman, I understand what you were up against in trying to reach a consensus on a bill that has been at issue for as long as WRRDA has, and I congratulate you all and hope that you will work with some of us who are concerned about the environmental aspects of the bill so that we can learn from this bill what needs to be changed in the future and what perhaps should be retained. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. And with that, Ms. Napolitano is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate just a moment of the time to congratulate both you, especially you, but the Committee of 4 and the staff on both sides. We normally forget that our staff works the hardest, but especially Ryan Seeger and David Wegner. We are here to do work for our constituency we were sent here to do. And we all need to continue working for bettering our country's water infrastructure, which will mean jobs and economy. And with that, again, thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Do any other members wish to be recognized? Yes, the gentlelady from Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman Shuster and Ranking Member Rahal, for holding this important markup today. I also want to thank Mr. Bishop and Mr. Gibbs for all the hard work that you've put into this. I appreciate your efforts to move forward the Water Resources and Reform Development Act, which is so important for updating our nation's aging water infrastructure. I'm particularly pleased that this bill included language from Water Infrastructure Now Public-Private Partnership Act, otherwise known as the WIN-P3 Act, which I introduced in the House earlier this year along with my fellow colleague, Rodney Davis, who represents Illinois as well. Many of the locks and dams required for the safe and efficient passage of goods and products on interior waterways, such as the Mississippi and Illinois rivers, were built during the Roosevelt administration nearly 80 years ago. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is doing the best it can, but it is overwhelmed by a backlog of projects. It is estimated that the necessary repairs and upgrades to these locks and dams could take decades to complete. That is not satisfactory for us. What we need is a new way to effectively fund these projects in a more timely fashion. And here is the solution that Congressman Davis and I proposed. This spring, we introduced the legislation that would help speed up improvements to our water infrastructure. The WIN-P3 Act would allow the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and private companies to set up new partnerships to fund improvements to locks and dams and other water infrastructure projects. Allowing these public-private partnerships is an innovative and necessary step that would help the Army Corps come up with new funding to help clear the estimated $60 billion in outstanding projects that would take literally decades to complete without this outside investment. Since this type of public-private partnership would be a change from the current way the Army Corps operates, we need to make sure that it operates properly. That is why our bill has safeguards to make sure every proposed project would improve water infrastructure and not waste money or resources. Every project proposal would undergo an independent evaluation by a third party to ensure it provides a better alternative than our current system. The fiscal constraints facing our nation require us to find new ways to get things done, and our bill does just that. It will take financial burdens off the Army Corps of Engineers and the taxpayers. It stimulates growth in the private sector and guarantees our waterways remain safe and navigable for the countless number of goods and products that float down these rivers every day to destinations across the world. Making the necessary improvements to the infrastructure that is essential to economic activity across our region is long overdue. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important markup, and I do yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Now recognize Ms. Estes from Connecticut for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Water Resources Reform and Development Act is a crucial piece of legislation to America's transportation policy, providing the authority and resources we need to sustain and grow commerce in America's harbors and along our inland waterways. It reflects our universal interest in protecting our fellow citizens from the ravages of flooding, a threat communities in my district regularly face. It also reflects our shared national interest in protecting the environment. Though we may take it for granted, water is our most precious natural resource. The health of this country and of future generations depends on a sustainable water management, and to that end, our country depends on the diligent work of this committee. As Ranking Member Bishop and others have expressed, this is not a perfect bill, and I would be remiss if I did not express concern about some provisions meant to streamline environmental reviews. Where essential resources like water are involved, thorough reviews are good for public safety, good for the economy, good for taxpayers, and good for the environment. However, I would be equally remiss if I did not point out that the benefits of moving forward with this legislation far outweigh any negatives. For anyone concerned about the economy or the environment or public safety, the message should be clear. No outcome could be worse than a failure to act. That is why I am so grateful to you, Mr. Chairman, and to you, Ranking Member Rahal, as well as my friends Representative Gibbs and Representative Bishop, for the leadership the four of you have demonstrated on this bipartisan basis. This bill is a compromise, something that is all too rare in Washington these days. Whatever my disagreements, I remember my constituents in Torrington who are bound to old regulations that are both costly and harmful to the environment. This bill is a good step for them to provide relief. I also think of my constituents in Meriden who face flooding and other infrastructure challenges. They need a partner in Washington, as do communities all across America. I am a proud co-sponsor of this bill, and I ask my colleagues to move this bill forward today, so that we can turn our focus to the critical task of funding for our water infrastructure. Again, my thanks to the Chairman, to the Ranking Member, and to their staffs. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Now we'll consider the bill for amendment. I have a manager's amendment at the desk and ask unanimous consent the amendment be considered as read. Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 24, offered by Mr. Shuster.
This amendment has been developed in a bipartisan manner. Since introducing the bill last week, we've worked with members who have raised issues, and in most cases, we worked very hard. We were able to work out solutions on these issues, including them in this amendment. A detailed fact sheet describing the amendments was distributed yesterday and is included in your folders. The amendment makes a number of technical and conforming changes to H.R. 3080, again included in your folder. That includes several additional provisions, including clarifying the environmental streamlining provisions, adds a newest section clarifying the projects that meet or exceed their cost limits. The non-federal sponsor may contribute funds to carry out the projects. It adds aquatic ecosystem restoration as eligible activity under Section 114. Clarifies provisions in Section 115 and inserts a provision requiring the Secretary of the Army, as part of an annual report, to submit an appendix listing the proposals that were not included in the annual report and to provide a description why these proposals were not included. Adds a new section clarifying that preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species is eligible activity under Section 104. Clarifies the Secretary carry out an assessment of maintenance needs on both the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway and the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway. Do any members wish to be recognized on this amendment? Mr. Ray?
Mr. Chairman, I support the manager's amendment and urge its adoption.
Are there any amendments to the amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment. All of those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments that wish to be offered? Mr. DeFazio is recognized for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It should have been distributed.
I believe it has been.
Okay.
It's in the folders.
All right. Then I may proceed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate at least some acknowledgement of the problem of invasive species in the bill, but I believe we need much more focus at the Corps of Engineers, and we need to give them more capability to focus on aquatic invasive species and better means and a centralized way of dealing intergovernmentally, both with states and intragovernmentally with other federal agencies on this issue, and that's the reason for this particular provision. I understand that there are concerns on the majority side that this would be a new program and it would authorize up to $30 million. The annual costs of just one invasive species are more than 20 times that currently, and the quagga mussel, and there are many other invasive species out there where the control efforts are phenomenally expensive once these things are introduced into the environment. They are in some places already in our national environment, but they haven't spread between projects of the Corps or between regions of the country, but there is a high likelihood they will without more scrutiny and effort. And that's the reason for this. The Corps has traditionally analyzed projects to a great extent on their cost-benefit ratio. If you look at what it's already costing us for aquatic invasive species and the potential if all of those spread nationwide, particularly things like the quagga mussel, the cost-benefit ratio on this small authorized new program would be something like 10,000 to 1. I don't think the Corps has ever built a project that comes close to that. And I would really urge that the committee consider this. There was a provision similar to this in the Senate bill, but it was only targeted for whatever reason, and I certainly don't object to that since it's in their bill, on the Columbia River Basin, although I represent downstate from there, and we've got the Willamette River and others. But I think just featuring one part of the country, which does have a significant number of Corps projects, over and above other parts of the country is not fair, because this is a nationwide problem caused by international pollution by these aquatic invasive species. So I would urge the committee to favorably consider this amendment.
Thank the gentleman. Any members wish to be heard on this amendment? Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. DeFazio, for introducing this amendment representing a large part of California's inland waterways, rivers, and reservoirs. To be able to get ahead of the problem of these invasive species is extremely important. We have several vulnerable lakes in our area, Clear Lake, which I represent together with Mr. Thompson, as well as the Sacramento River Basin. Mr. DeFazio's amendment goes well towards helping us prevent a very, very expensive problem. I urge support for his amendment.
Thank the gentleman. Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to thank you for including in the manager's amendment some language to expand the noxious weeds program to include aquatic invasive species, but I would like to support Mr. DeFazio's amendment as well. Aquatic invasives are impacting communities across the country, as he said, including in southern Nevada, where you think of that as a desert, but they are having a serious presence in our local waters, especially in Lake Mead. Lake Mead is a crown jewel in the National Park Service system, and it welcomes 8 million visitors a year who contribute up to $1 billion to the local and regional economy. And in addition to the recreational opportunities provided by the lake for boating and fishing, it is also essential to the vitality of Las Vegas and southern Nevada because it's the source of 90% of our water. The spread of quagga mussels in this critical reservoir has led to expensive countermeasures by the Bureau of Land Reclamation, which is currently spending nearly $1 million a year to prevent these mussels from infiltrating the Hoover Dam intakes. In addition to countermeasures to prevent mussel infestation in the water intake channels, the Southern Nevada Water Authority has had to change the design of a new intake project that is currently underway to prevent those mussels from growing there. The language that you included in the manager's amendment expands and gives additional tools, but I would appreciate seeing it go further to cover the whole country, and I would urge support of the amendment.
Thank the gentlelady. I recognize Mr. Rahal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I commend the gentleman from Oregon for his initiative and for the goals that he seeks to achieve here. They're worthy, but unfortunately, in this process by which we have reached agreement, we don't want the lowest score. We want the 0 score. That's the process to which we've agreed, and because this amendment would score, I would have to oppose it.
I thank the gentleman, and I also will have to oppose the amendment. Appreciate the gentleman's and the member's concern. Currently, the Corps of Engineers missions include a very diverse portfolio of activities. However, like most agencies, the funding is not adequate at this time. This amendment would create a new program for the Corps, a program that is duplicative in my view, because you already have folks like the Coast Guard, which is, I believe, a more appropriate agency to carry out vessel inspections like those imposed in the amendment. In addition, we have added a new section clarifying that preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species is eligible under Section 104 of the River and Harbor Maintenance Act of 1958. So we've tried very hard working with the minority to craft legislation that does not create new mandates or new programs. Therefore, I would urge all members to oppose.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
given the opposition of my esteemed ranking member and other concerns raised here, at this time I'll withdraw the amendment, but I would observe that I really do believe we should revisit this issue. This small investment now would save the country hundreds of millions, potentially billions of dollars in the future. Thank you, Mr.
I thank the gentleman for withdrawing, and we'll move on.
I would yield certainly to. I don't know if I have the time, but I would yield
Mr.
if
Chair,
I do.
just very quickly, in California, we spend $10 million a year, just one agency, trying to scrape and be able to control some of that quagga So it is a critical issue for a lot of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the gentleman withdrawing his amendment. And with that, where are we?
Are there any other amendments?
Are there any other amendments? Ms. Hahn is recognized for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to introduce this amendment along with my colleague, Ms. Napolitano from California. And one of the things I am most excited about in the draft of the bill before us today is the section expanding the uses of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund to include berth dredging and contaminated sediment disposal. Port complex that I represent in Los Angeles contributes more to the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund than anyone else, just about $263 million annually between Los Angeles and Long Beach just last year. Together, they handle near 40% of our nation's imported cargo, but for all that, under the traditional uses for the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, my ports only see a couple of $100,000 back. It's not that our particular dredging needs are less important, they just didn't fit into the old definitions. So my ports have some reason to be excited that they are now eligible for even the small percentage of funds that may now be used for expanded uses like theirs. When you've been getting next to nothing like this for so long, this counts as serious project. But the truth is, expanded uses aren't just important for ports like mine, that do not have significant traditional dredging needs. The silt that pours into main channels in the Gulf Coast ports pours into the berthing channels. It doesn't do a port any good to have their main channel fully dredged in a sandbar where their ships are supposed to pull up to dock. Donor and donee ports alike have expanded use needs. And in the context of that need, limiting the total expanded use dollars at the Army Corps of Engineers to a mere 5% isn't going to get that job done. My amendment would increase the amount that the Army Corps could spend, not have to, but could spend on expanded uses from 5% to 10% of the total amount spent from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. It does not require that the Army Corps spend 10%. It merely gives them the flexibility to spend up to that much after weighing the needs of big and small harbors across the country. In an environment where we pass a WRRDA bill once or twice a decade, I believe creating that flexibility in this bill is even more important, and I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and I appreciate her passion and her leadership in supporting America's largest port, and a very important port to the United States of America. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to oppose this amendment. The way Section 201 of H.R. 3080 is written, all ports, big and small, would benefit by requiring the expanded use subsection to jump from 5% to 10%, although would harm many other ports in Section 201. Since the revenues in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund are estimated to continue to increase, if this legislation were enacted at the 5% level, it is likely funds would be devoted to harbor maintenance activities. The 5% will actually increase the amount that's going to be spent on the ports and on each successive fiscal year in terms of actual dollars. There will be more funds available each year for expanded use, so that 5% number, that percentage, will grow in actual dollars. And as mentioned, we've carefully balanced compromise among all ports and all stakeholders in this, and so again, I at this time must oppose the amendment. And with that, Ms. Napolitano is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I rise in support of the Hahn-Napolitano amendment. The parameters of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund were set up in 1986, 27 years ago, and largely favor shallower ports that need a lot of dredging in their channel. And while I agree they need some help, I think it's time that we begin to look at what the impact is having on the larger ports in the United States. Naturally, water ports such as LA and Long Beach pay the most taxes into the system, but are restricted from spending the money on projects they actually need. Shippers at both ports, Los Angeles and Long Beach, paid $263 million in harbor maintenance taxes last year, received zero, I say zero, in harbor maintenance. No money. This bill takes a small step to helping the bigger ports receive some equity by providing for expanded uses of the HMT funds. After the expenditures meet the bill target, the bill allows the Army Corps to spend 5% of the funds left over on such uses as berth dredging and environmental remediation. We believe it will add fairness to the system to increase the amount of expended use of these funds to 10%. I would say much in my amendment to 30%. This is an important step in allowing donor ports to actually use the money they're paying into the system. Many of these ports defer action on environmental contamination until it is absolutely necessary following their construction expenditures. This provision will help to clean our ports and develop their berths, and I urge a yes amendment, a yes on this vote, even though, Mr. Chairman, you are opposing. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. With that, I recognize Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for recognizing me, and I thank my colleagues for offering this amendment. And I certainly understand the genesis of the amendment and the need for our larger ports to have sufficient funds for non-traditional uses. I would make a couple of comments. One is that for the first time, we are suggesting a 5% set-aside for non-traditional uses for the larger ports, so long as the target appropriation for the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund is met. I think this is a good first step. The fact is that we don't really have a good fix on what the unmet need is, and so I think starting at 5%, getting an assessment of whether or not that addresses the need or whether we need to go somewhat higher as we go forward with the future WRRDAs, I think is something that we should look at. But I think the most important point is the one that the Chairman made a few moments ago, which is that what we tried to do with the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund was reach a balance, and that we try to reach a balance that would bring more money out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund for harbor maintenance needs. We're moving from 51% current to 67% next year. That's about a $300 million increase in the amounts of money that will be available to the Corps. And also to have a set-aside for small harbors, a 10% set-aside for 2 years, just 2 years, to begin to address the backlog there. And then, as I say, we have this non-traditional or expanded use for the larger harbors. So it's a balance. And if we were to change the percentage from 5 to 10, that could disrupt that balance. So for me, I certainly understand why this amendment is being offered, sympathize with the issue and the problem. I would hope that my two colleagues would withdraw this amendment, recognizing that we're making progress on an issue that has been vexing for a great many of us, and hopefully we can address this further as we go forward. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Brown, Mr. Gibbs was recognized is the line next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to let Representative Hahn know about a year ago, I actually went out to the LA port to visit it to get a better understanding of what the issues was out there. And just for the record so everybody understands, under the current law, the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund can only be used on federal waterways. And, of course, at your ports, dredging is not an issue. Your issue on dredging is in the berths, which is not the federal waterways. And so expanded uses, and this, I think, is a good compromise in moving it forward. And I've been very supportive of expanding that into the berths. And then, of course, that maybe hopefully free up some dollars that were used, local dollars, for other things. And so as my ranking member Bishop states, so I think this is a good balance moving forward. And raising it from 5 to 10% could cause some problems for some other ports and maybe defeat what we're trying to do to help some of these smaller ports. So I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Ms. Brown's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You make it very hard to make your argument or your position when you make your position known from the very beginning. And I would certainly want to agree with you. You've done an excellent job.
Can't imagine how much I appreciate that.
But I want to say a couple of words. First of all, thank you for your leadership on this. We have not really had but 2 bills in the last 14 years, and we really have moved behind our national competition. When we started the harbor maintenance tax, the purpose was for the harbor maintenance, not for offset budgets, not for having $7 billion in cargo taxes that we do not use in the United States. These taxes are supposed to go back to the ports that they collect them to improve their infrastructure. It wasn't meant to use to inflate budget revenues or to fund other non-transportation related programs. If we use these taxes for the intended purpose, not only will we improve our nation's infrastructure, but we could be employing thousands of architects, engineers, and construction workers on these projects. As less and less federal funds are made available to our ports, the harbor maintenance tax will give ports more flexibility in the way they use their fund, and it's critical for our ports and to give them to be able to compete internationally. Each port is different, and they have different needs, and we need to give them the tools that they need to do this. Mr. Chairman, I want to say that this is, I've never seen a perfect bill, but this is a perfect beginning. But as we move forward, there are adjustments that need to be made to the bill before we go to the floor. I appreciate the Big Four getting together. Thank you very much. But there are still issues that are outstanding.
I appreciate that and understand that. And I think we're also going to have a discussion about what you're talking about, the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, but for now I'll yield to Ms. Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Grace, I don't know about you, but I appreciate everybody's comments, but seeing the opposition offered so eloquently,
and may I add
I will withdraw this amendment.
I thank the gentlelady for withdrawing, and as mentioned, I mentioned many times, I think this is a good start. I'm an East Coast person, and I see the need on the West Coast. They're putting in a lot of money and not getting much back. So again, this is a good first step, I think. I thank you for withdrawing. And with that, are there any other amendments? I'd like the clerk to designate the amendment, Ms. Hahn's amendment.
Amendment number 38, offered by Ms. Hahn.
And I reserve a point of order on this amendment, and with that, I recognize Ms. Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a feeling I know where this one's going as well. I know that there is a point of order against my amendment, but I appreciate your willingness to let me speak, and hopefully some other members will speak on this as well. You know, we really have to stop raiding the harbor maintenance tax to pay for things that aren't maintaining our harbors. According to the American Association of Port Authorities, the full dimensions of our nation's harbors and channels are available less than 35% of the time. The head of the Army Corps of Engineers told us that it could take 5 years to fully dredge all the nation's deep draft harbors if we fully fund dredging. I know it was hard work getting this draft to 80% by 2020, and that's a lot better than what we have now. But we can't keep spending years waiting to achieve a fraction of what we know is needed today. Our ports need 100% of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, and they need it now. Our failure to fully dredge our nation's ports and harbors causes billions of dollars in added costs every year for the goods we buy. I don't think it's right to make the American businesses and families pay for a tax and then pay again for our failure to use that tax as we promised. Every day we wait, every day we keep withholding the full sum of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund from our ports, it costs us. Other nations are making big investments in their infrastructure, and they're going to start out-competing us. The Canadians, the Brazilians, they see our failing port infrastructure as the weakness that it is, and they're moving to exploit it. Our economy won't keep working with failing ports. This is an issue that can make or break every port and harbor in this nation, big or small, recreational or commercial, West Coast, East Coast, Gulf Coast, and the Great Lakes. The underuse of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund affects you whether you have a port on your front yard or if there isn't a body of water within 100 miles. I believe that Congress needs to start looking at mechanisms to guarantee that 100% of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund gets spent on maintaining our harbors. Clearly, we need to start thinking outside the box, and I think my amendment is one of the options that's worth considering. I know one of the challenges to my plan to require the full use of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Funds on ports, like we said we would, is this question: what's your pay for? I'll tell you what my pay for is. It's called the Harbor Maintenance Tax. Shippers have been paying billions of dollars of it since 1986, and frankly, it's time for Congress to deliver on what they've been paying for all these years. Again, I thank the Chairman for his willingness to entertain some discussion on my amendment, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentlelady. I certainly understand and sympathize with what she's saying in the amendment. I reserved a point of order because, well, first of all, the Maintenance Trust Fund, the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, is an agreement between the port community and the committees and the House of Representatives over the provision in Title I. To take the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund off budget would require an offset in excess of $20 billion and would require the input of multiple committees in the House of Representatives. And since we would have to change the tax code to implement many of these changes. So that being said, I agree with the gentlelady. You know, those shippers pay into this fund, and presently, about 50% historically has been paid out for purposes of maintaining our ports and harbors. We've seen this year, in 2014, it'll go up to 65% of the fund, which I think is positive. And then the reforms in our bill, 2% a year is the target to get this up by 2020 to 80%. Again, I understand what the gentlelady is saying, and it's one of those things, though, because of getting other committees involved is something that would be very difficult. And in fact, on MAP 21, we attempted to do something very similar and ran into problems. So again, at this point, I have to oppose the gentlelady's amendment. And with that, recognize Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I too, agree completely with the substance of the amendment. We have discussed this in our subcommittee any number of times, that the amount of money coming out of the trust fund now and historically is inadequate for the needs of our nation's harbors. This trust fund has been in existence since 1986. Not once, not in any one of those years from 1986 to now have we taken 100% of the proceeds and used them for the purposes for which they were collected. This is a problem that has run through Democratic administrations and Democratic Congresses, through Republican administrations and Republican Congresses, and we have to fix it. As the Chairman points out, though, the fix is expensive and therefore not attainable to us right now. But we're going to fall behind. We are falling behind if we don't make a greater investment in our ports. As I said a few moments ago, we're making progress on this issue. We're going to spend $300 million more in year one of this bill out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund than we have in the past. But we're going to move to 80%, but we ultimately have to move to 100%. As I say, 100% is not attainable to us now. So I have two asks. I know the Chairman has lodged a point of order against the amendment. I hope that Ms. Hahn will withdraw the amendment. But my, I think, more important ask is that every single one of us on this committee that has complained at one point or another about inadequate funding coming out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, and we've wanted to blame the administration, whether it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, we're the ones that appropriate the funds. So when the time comes for the next appropriation cycle, if we ever return to regular order with respect to appropriations. Every one of us has to lock arms that cares about this issue and push the appropriators to see to it that we are spending the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund proceeds for the purposes for which they were collected. We're not doing it now, and so long as we allow that to happen, we're not going to do it. We can do it. Now, what we have to do, though, is increase the 302B allocation for the Corps, because if we don't, the increased spending of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund will be at the expense of the construction account of the Corps. So we will be solving, at least in part, one problem, but at the expense of creating yet another problem. That gets us nowhere. So let's, all of us who care about this, and I've heard from members on both sides of the aisle, let's all of us commit that when the time comes to appropriate, we speak with one voice as the T&I committee and say that enough, we need to put more money into harbor maintenance, and ultimately we need to get to 100%. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate the gentleman's comments, and also just want to make a point that I've said in the beginning, and I'll probably say it and have been saying it over and over. I am 100% committed to getting back to regular order on WRRDA bills, that every 2 years we do a WRRDA bill. I think it's extremely important that, and when you're talking about our ports and our harbors and the inland waterways and the like, that we get back to regular order. And I think, and I'm hopeful this bill moving forward is going to get us back on track and keeps the pressure build up that we come back and do these WRRDA bills every Congress. With that, Mr. Webster is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the job you've done, a stellar job you've done on this bill. It's awesome. I, too, would love to support Ms. Hans, not only her First Amendment, but her Second Amendment. I think both. I don't blame her. If I had that kind of revenue coming out of my state, going somewhere else and being distributed to other places, I don't blame her. And the same with this. I don't blame her, and I don't blame myself or you, Mr. Chairman, for supporting the fact that we'd love to have all of the money. It just seems so simple. I wish it were. I'm sorry it's complicated, and unfortunately it doesn't fit here, but it doesn't reduce the fact that every one of us have needs. Our state, Florida, has a huge coastline and many, many ports, and we could use all the money ourselves. But in the end, I think this is a great bill, and I guess we need to support that. And I hope the gentlelady will withdraw her amendment.
I thank the gentleman. With that, Mr. Nolan from Minnesota seeks recognition.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'd like to commend Mrs. Hahn for her leadership on this critically important issue. These fees were not set up to balance the budget. And unfortunately, we've had bipartisan collaboration on that. Democratic and Republican administrations have done that. But the fact is that many of the ports are operating at 80% of capacity because of the lack of funds for dredging and improving those ports. And that's costing us literally billions of dollars in business income, in jobs, and important economic development. So I too applaud the committee for moving in the right direction here in securing that at least 80% of the harbor maintenance funds go for, in fact, harbor maintenance. But I believe, as Ms. Hahn does, that 100% of those funds that were set up and designed for harbor maintenance should go for harbor maintenance. And we've got to stop both Democrat and Republican administrations from using these monies to balance their budgets. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would the gentlelady consider withdrawing her amendment?
Does anybody else want to say anything nice about it?
As soon as you get done withdrawing, I'm ready to.
On that, I humbly withdraw this amendment, but it was a good one.
And I thank the gentlelady. Once again, I think you've heard from both sides of the aisle. People pay that user fee, that tax to use the ports. It's not being used, and we go around the country. Almost every one of us here has a port and a harbor that needs to use those dollars. We had a hearing here. Mr. Gibbs had a hearing. It might have been last Congress. Mr. Gibbs had a hearing when over and over again they said if you unlock that $700 million that isn't being spent, now it's more than that, would probably take care of most of the problems in our ports and harbors. So again, agreeing with Mr. Bishop, we all need to work as a committee to make sure those funds go to its intended purpose, and that is to maintain those ports and harbors that are going to keep us competitive, keep us competitive in the world economy, and making sure we get things in and out of those ports as efficient as possible. So with that, I appreciate the gentlelady withdrawing her amendment, and ask, are there other amendments? Mr. Sutherland's recognized for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk, and I ask unanimous consent the amendment be considered as read.
I ask the clerk to designate the amendment.
Amendment number 10 offered by Mr. Sutherland.
Mr. Sutherland is recognized to speak on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to applaud you and Mr. Rahal and Chairman Gibbs for your great work here. But today I come before this committee as one voice representing thousands of people in my district. I'm here today to speak on behalf of my people. I say my people because my family has lived in my district for 200 years. The countless people of Northwest Florida that are known as oystermen. Small business owners, struggling families have been devastated in recent years by decreased water flows down the Florida Apalachicola River and into the Apalachicola Bay. Best known as the water wars. This battle has been going on now for 50 years. It wasn't so long ago that Apalachicola Bay was producing more than 90% of Florida's oyster harvest and more than 10% of America's oyster harvest overall. Nearby communities such as Apalachicola and East Point were built on these waters, where a way of life was handed down from fathers to sons and mothers and daughters. This is a proud region, a place where heritage matters, and it's a place on the verge of extinction. Already staggered by powerful storms, the Deepwater Horizon disaster, a fishing net ban, a shuttered paper mill, an ever-dwindling job market, and also 60% of their land is owned by the federal government. They are trapped. Franklin County's last lifeline is this bay. But the oyster populations have waned, dropping from 430 oysters per square mile to just 64. Families that had harvested for generations have been forced off the water. Over 2,500 jobs have been lost. According to the Department of Commerce, oyster landings in this last year have decreased over 60%, with revenues dropping 44%. So what has caused a marked decrease in our oyster population? The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission recently concluded the oyster fishery failure was the result of upstream consumption outside of the fishery manager's control. On August the 12th, 2013, the Secretary of Commerce declared a fisheries disaster declaration for the Apalachicola Bay, citing reduced downstream river flow from man-made dams along these rivers. The state of Georgia was drawing down water from Lake Lanier and diverting it to rapidly growing Atlanta metropolitan areas, all without any consideration of the communities downstreams. What does this mean? Well, less water downstream means higher salinity levels in the Apalachicola Bay. And it is that salinity level that is critical to produce the best tasting oysters that I've ever put in my mouth, thereby making it impossible for the oyster population to thrive. That is why my amendment is so critical. This is not about anything other than real people, a real issue. It simply would require the Corps to receive congressional authorization for water reallocations in excess of 5%. Over the last 5 decades, water flow down the Apalachicola has decreased over 50%. And if we do not step in, it will continue to go down. In other words, the Corps could not continue to simply reallocate water for Metro Atlanta's use without first coming to Congress for approval. The Corps is the problem. And that's the one thing I've heard everybody on this committee admit over the last several weeks. Recently, there was a field hearing in my district held by Senator Nelson and Senator Rubio, and the Corps actually stated they do not have the responsibility to consider the downstream effects of their decisions. What? Real people. And they don't have the responsibility or the obligation to consider their needs? I don't agree with that. It is time that we weigh in on this issue. Some have tried to label this a choice between people and shellfish, as if lives and livelihoods weren't at stake along the Apalachicola Bay. Well, I just asked Ronald and Jesse Gilbert in East Point what this means to them. Married 43 years, Ronald hails from a long line of oystermen dating back 10 generations. Jesse would often join him on the waters of the Apalachicola Bay. Both their sons are full-time oystermen, supporting a total of 7 children. Ronald says they've never seen a situation this bad in the Apalachicola Bay. They used to harvest 20 to 30 bags of oysters in a single day, but now they can barely manage 2. Jessie said that she had to give all her money from cleaning vacation homes this summer on St. George Island to her grandchildren to buy clothes and school supplies. Her son is afraid they're going to lose their home. The local churches and charitable organizations want to help, but they don't have the resources either. When Ronald and Jesse called my office, what was I supposed to tell them, Mr. Chairman? That this isn't about real people? What should I tell their grandchildren? All they want is all they've ever had, and that is an opportunity for earned success. And I just implore this committee to take this situation seriously, and I pray that you would consider this dying community an incredible part of our heritage and our legacy. And I urge the committee to support my amendment, because my people, our people, American people, need this. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I'm very, very familiar with the gentleman's issue. He's spoken to me on many, many occasions about how the water management issue of the Corps of Engineers, the reservoirs, affects his state, and I know he's particularly concerned about the Corps' management of Lake Rainier outside of Atlanta. I respect his passion for this issue and want to be helpful to help him finding a solution that all the states affected can support. For almost 2 decades, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida have been battling over the future allocation of water in the river basin that crosses their borders. Georgia wants to have enough water to allow Metro Atlanta to continue growing, while Alabama and Florida, the downstream users, want enough water flowing for their economic well-being. The dispute has involved several federal agencies, courts, and mediators. Based on the most recent court decision, the Army Corps of Engineers is now updating its management plan. The Corps of Engineers must now decide how much water to allocate for various purposes, including drinking water, and how much water to send downstream to meet other human and ecological needs. This amendment would require Congress to approve major modifications to the water management plans at the Corps of Engineers dams. I believe it goes too far and believe that a more appropriate role for Congress and the Secretary of the Army is to urge states to reach agreement on interstate water agreements and compacts. I also believe it is appropriate for the Secretary to facilitate such interstate agreements, and Congress should provide prompt consideration of interstate water agreements and compacts when they are reached. To that point, I have a substitute amendment to address this difficult but important issue, and will offer it at the appropriate time. Do any other members wish to be recognized on Mr. Sutherland's amendment? Ms. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't know about this issue, but I am persuaded by listening to the gentleman's passion about this, and also recognizing the background of the Army Corps of Engineers of doing water diversion projects, not just in Florida, but I'm up in the Great Lakes region. I'll tell you, over 100 years ago, the Army Corps of Engineers actually changed the diversion. I mean, they actually changed the direction of the Chicago River. So they now have what is known as the Chicago Diversionary Canal, and they are diverting over 2 billion gallons of Great Lakes water. I forget if it's every 5 minutes or something. I mean, incredible amounts of water that is being diverted. And they did it years ago. I don't know if there's anybody here from Chicago or Illinois as I look up and down here. And God love you. But, I mean, you'd never be able to do that now. They did that because they had a sanitary problem in the city of Chicago, which was, so they fixed that problem, which was okay for them. Although if you live in St. Louis, I guess you didn't like too much having all the Chicago sewage flushed down the Mississippi River. But at any rate, I mean, the Army Corps of Engineers does not have clean hands on some of these water diversion projects. It's outrageous what's happening, I believe, to the Great Lakes water level. I don't know whether you're going to withdraw your amendment or what you're going to do, but I'm going to vote yes on it if we get a chance to vote yes.
Thank you, gentlelady. Any other members wish to be heard on this amendment? Seeing none, I now will consider amendments to the amendment. I have a substitute amendment at the desk. I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read. Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 20.
They'll pass it out, too, while she's designating it. Take a
Amendment number 25, offered by Chairman Shuster.
What?
You need to speak first, and then you can mess up. You can start describing.
My substitute amendment clarifies the roles of states, Congress, and the United States Army Corps of Engineers when there is an interstate dispute over water. Disputes like that in Alabama, Florida, and Georgia are more appropriately addressed through the interstate agreements that take into consideration the needs of the affected states. An appropriate role for Congress and the Secretary of the Army is to urge states to reach agreement on interstate water agreements and compacts. The Army Corps of Engineers can help by facilitating in the development of an interstate agreement and by adopting policies, procedures for the operations of reservoirs that are consistent with interstate agreements. And Congress should provide prompt consideration of interstate water agreements and compacts when they are reached. This substitute is a sense of Congress that will reaffirm the roles of all parties in interstate disputes over water. So I would urge all members to support this amendment. Is anyone
Question.
wish to be heard on this?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rahal is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in support of your substitute amendment. I think it's clearly a way here to for Congress to address the technical issues of water management. We've worked collectively with the Army Corps of Engineers to find an equitable solution here, and I think this amendment furthers that progress.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be heard on it? Mr. Sutherland is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, thank you for giving me an opportunity to really shed light, and I appreciate Ms. Miller and her comments, and these people just want a chance to tell their story. I appreciated Senator Rubio and Senator Nelson doing a field hearing in Apalachicola a couple weeks ago. People are learning about this travesty, and we've got to make this is about people. And look, I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your help and your sense of the Congress here. And I think that if you're willing, and I know you are, and I appreciate Mr. Rahal's willingness to continue to shed light on this issue, I would love to have a GAO study, and I know I can request that, to assess the downstream impact to a region because of the Corps' mismanagement. And I would love for this committee to have the Corps of Engineers come before us as a result of that study and answer our questions. And I would, and that's something I can talk to you about and request later. But I think we're making progress here, and I will support your amendment. And I thank you for this opportunity, and I thank those of you who are learning about this going forward. With that, I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and again, I appreciate his passion. And a GAO report is certainly something that I'd be willing to undertake and work with the gentleman on moving that forward. With that, I recognize Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, am very concerned with the passion of Representative Sutherland, and there's challenges around the country. We've had issues that we had a hearing on the Missouri River, similar, not, but I hope this amendment, in the sense of Congress, actually pushes the Corps to work with the locals, the states, and come to a solution. And I think if the states can come to a solution, that's a lot better than whatever solution Congress can do here. The one-size-fits-all policy, it always bothers me. But I'm very supportive of pushing the Corps to work with the states, and let's get this to a reasonable compromise and make it work. But the Corps hasn't been pushed enough, but hopefully your passion and all this effort.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be heard? Mr. Garamendi.
A question. This seems to apply nationwide. Is that correct?
The sense of Congress, yes.
There have been compacts in the West, Colorado River, for example,
Sure.
and others, Columbia and others, that have been in place for a long time. There are, from time to time, disputes and controversies. I'm a little concerned, and I'd like, while this is undoubtedly going to pass, I think we should be aware of the potential impact, particularly the last subsection, which calls for the Secretary to adopt policies and implement procedures. You may very well be setting off a short fuse on a very, very long problem that's been around for a long, long time. So I'd be very careful here. If you're trying to address a specific problem on a specific river between two states, I really suggest that you do that and be very careful about what you may be doing nationwide. So I would just urge caution.
Well, I agree with the gentleman. That's what we're doing. We want to make sure this is very we're making sure we don't cause unintended
Could you then apply
problems.
it to this specific river?
Excuse me?
Could you then apply your amendment to this
Well, we're
specific river?
applying it to the Corps in general on any of its projects. Again, that is not, what we're doing, I believe, is basically reaffirming what the Corps has done in the past, allowing states to come together with compacts, not to disrupt those.
Yeah. As I said earlier, it is in the last section of your amendment that you're giving the Secretary specific responsibility to engage in an action that may have repercussions that are unintended. So I just urge caution here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We'll take a look at that. Thank you very much for your money. Any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, the question is on the Shuster substitute amendment to the Sutherland amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the Shuster substitute amendment is agreed to. Now the question is on the Sutherland amendment as amended by the Shuster amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments to the bill? Mr. Napolitano is recognized for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not about to beat a dead horse. My amendment will ensure that at least 30% of taxes paid on harbor maintenance within a state are spent within that state. This intends to remedy a longstanding and incredible injustice to ports and their states that has grown over the decades within the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. The top 10 harbors in the U.S. collect 70% of the trust revenues, and they receive only 16% of those for trust fund expenditures. The Corps of Engineers estimates the nation's busiest 59 ports are maintained to only 35% of their authorized debt. The situation can increase the cost of shipping as vessels carry less cargo to reduce their draft, wait for high tide, as was brought up by a formerly by a colleague, and would also increase the risk of ship grounding or collision. And according to CRS, only 30 to 45% of the trust fund revenues are being spent in harbors that shippers use. That's nationally. This is a major problem, Mr. Chairman, in California, where our economy relies on productivity of our ports. We have the harbors of Seattle and Tacoma receiving 1% of their funds they pay. Harbors of New York, Boston, and Houston receive less than 25%. My amendment tries to bring some equity to the Harbor Maintenance Fund. Don't forget the Alameda Corridor is a corridor of national significance in California, and it processes 45 to 55% of the nation's goods. So we're trying, Mr. Chairman, to ask for some relief, some assistance, and stop robbing Peter to pay Paul. As was pointed out by Mr. Bishop, maybe we need to ask the appropriators of the Section 302B and ensure that maybe we will be able to take a better look at what is happening. The amendment just is an effort to try to bring more attention to these, and I ask for an aye vote.
I thank the gentlelady for her amendment. I think that we have started to address the situation in the ports in the West Coast, allocating 5% to non-traditional uses of it, which, again, that's a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, at this point, I have to oppose the amendment. We've written 3080, and that all ports, big and small, would benefit. This amendment would alter a carefully crafted compromise by requiring the states receive no less than 30% of the revenues deposited into the Treasury through the Harbor Maintenance Trust Tax. Customs Bureau collects these fees at individual ports around the nation and deposits them into the Treasury. Congress then draws from those funds for the annual appropriations. A few states like California may benefit from the proposal. However, a vast majority of our states with coastal ports would likely suffer under this proposal. H.R. 3080 takes a national approach to the Harbor Maintenance Trust needs. And again, at this point, I'll have to oppose it. But again, I think we've taken a step in the right direction to be able to address some of those West Coast ports' needs. First, I recognize Mr. Bishop. Mr. Gibbs.
Yeah, a lot of things have been said already, and one thing that hasn't been said, I think the representative from California talked about, the robbing Peter to pay Paul. You need to think about our whole system, maritime transportation, as a system. And if you look at what's happened in some areas of the country, the Great Lakes is an example, where the ports are interdependent on each other, what's happening there. On the East Coast, there's ships that go from one port to the next port to the next port. And so I think you really have to consider it as a system, and we should be concerned about what's going on. And I think we've reached a good compromise to move forward to this and get more money out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund for its use. So I would oppose your amendment, but so I yield to Mr. Bishop.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and you know, this is the third amendment we've had on the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. The genesis of each one is exactly the same, which is that we are not spending that which we take in for the purposes for which it was collected. And again, I will say, as Chairman Gibbs just said, that what we're trying to do in this bill is take that first step towards achieving a balance that will address, in some measure, greater than we are now, the needs of large harbors, will address in some measure the needs that we are not addressing adequately now of small harbors. And so I think that if we were to move to a 30% return, that would disrupt that balance. And again, I will say that the answer to the amendment that Ms. Napolitano has offered and the amendment that Ms. Hahn offered is the same answer, which is fully spending the proceeds of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, but making sure we do so in a fashion that does not diminish the construction funds available to the Corps. And with that, I hope Ms. Napolitano will withdraw the amendment, but I certainly understand her motivation for offering it.
Gentlelady would like to speak. Ms. Napolitano.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and garnering the small opposition to this bill, I would regretfully withdraw the amendment, but I would also like to ask that we look at making sure the appropriators do not defund the Army Corps Building Construction Fund.
Yep.
And making sure that we protect them so that they can do their job. Thank you, and I do withdraw.
I thank the gentlelady for withdrawing her amendment. And again, as Mr. Bishop pointed out and others have said, the long term is making sure those dollars that are in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund go to its intended purpose, and that is to build, rebuild, dredge, keep our ports competitive so we can have a competitive, our products going in and out of the country remain competitive. So again, thank you for withdrawing. Next, are there any other amendments? Ms. Brown has an amendment.
Okay.
Without objection, would the clerk designate the amendment?
I have an amendment at the desk. I ask unanimous consent that it be considered as read.
Would the clerk designate the amendment?
Amendment number 11 offered by Ms. Brown.
Ms. Brown is recognized to explain her amendment.
First of all, Mr. Chairman, I want to commend you for restoring bipartisan nature to this committee, and I want to thank Chairman Rahal, Bishop, Gibbs, and also Mr. Webster from Florida for working on this bill. This is a very important amendment and bill to the state of Florida. The Port Council is here. I see the port director from Miami, Jacksonville. We have 15 ports in Florida, and I would just like for them to stand up so you can feel that we are very interested in what we're doing here. Will the port directors and all of the port people from Florida stand up? You see them, Mr. Chairman? They're here.
I see him now, and I'm going to see him later today. I hope Mr. Johnson has not drank too much coffee.
Okay, thank you. And the mayor's office, former Senator Tony Hill is here. So we're all here, and we're all very interested in having a port bill, sir. You do understand that. And this amendment I offer, along with Ms. Frankel, is a very simple one. It authorizes projects that receive a final chief report up to 1 year following enactment of the bill. This is no different from other language included in past WRRDA bills. In fact, we've had 2 years. This authorized for 1 year. Under the bill's current arbitration deadline, critical projects at 2 deep water ports in Florida and several others in other locations throughout the United States that are expecting their chief report in just a few months will have to wait years before they can make any progress in preparing for the future. The progress of receiving a chief report for a project is a long and very complicated. It includes rigorous studies and cost-benefit analysis. It must be economical and environmentally justified, and it must provide an overall benefit to the country. These projects impacted by this amendment are exactly the same ones currently listed in the bill. They just don't have their chief report and will get it a few months later. As we hold this hearing today, the Corps of Engineers and other federal agencies are spending billions of U.S. tax dollars rebuilding the infrastructure in Iraq and Afghanistan with very limited results. But right here in the United States, we can't spend a penny on water infrastructure without finding offsets and cutting vital programs. This is very troubling and not what the American people expect from their representation. The Jacksonville Port and North Florida community that I represented can't afford any more delays in preparing the port for larger modern ships set to arrive in 2015. A deepened draft is critical to the continuing viability of Jacksport as an economic engine for Northeast Florida. Today, the port provides 65,000 area jobs and $19 billion a year in economic activities. With a deepening draft, the port has estimated that one shipping company alone will add 90,000 jobs to the region. We've been failing to prepare our ports for the post-Pan-Atlantic ships that are falling behind our international competition. Ports throughout Asia, Europe, South America, and Caribbean all have ports with depths of 50 feet. Everyone says that we're here today to create jobs and improve our nation's infrastructure. But without these amendments, we're killing 90,000 jobs in the Jacksonville alone. In fact, the headlines in the local paper after the bill was introduced slated, Jacksport agent terminal goals if no dredging this year. I agree with the full support reauthorization WRRDA every 2 years. I agree with that. But we have not had, in the last 14 years, only 2 bills. Simply put, authorizing these additional projects will create thousands of jobs, spur economic development, and benefit the nation as a whole. This bill continues to move through the process. We need to work together to make sure that we treat every state fairly and don't arbitrarily leave any critical infrastructure projects behind.
Yield back?
Yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I understand her position. I want to state again that, one of the goals of mine, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Rahal, but we've had a number of discussions, is to get back to regular order, doing WRRDA bills every Congress. This bill is going to take care of a lot of the reforms that we've been talking about for years, and I think it makes it somewhat easier for us to dealing with those infrastructure projects, those port projects going forward on a regular basis. One of the key principles in developing this WRRDA bill was increasing transparency, accountability, and congressional oversight without ceding our constitutional authority to the executive branch. This WRRDA bill authorizes 23 vital water resource projects that have completed the technical review by the Corps of Engineers and been recommended by the Corps' Chief of Engineers. The Chief's report is the gold standard. It's gone through all the economic analysis and design and found funding, the non-federal funding, and based on extensive studies, it provides a detailed description of the need for construction. The committee held a full committee hearing to review all of the pending Chief's reports on June 5th. The committee has reviewed all of them. That's what our responsibility is, to look at these things, to vet them, to debate them, to talk about them, and make sure that we put our stamp on there, not just the Corps' and the executive branch stamp. My position has been clear. In order to maintain our congressional authority, we must review the final Chief's reports and specifically authorize them. That's why I'm committed to making sure that every Congress, and need be more frequently than that if there are projects out there that need our attention, to do that. So I don't believe we can hand over our authority to the administration or the Corps and allow them to self-authorize, and I believe that's what we would be doing, abdicating our responsibility as Congress and abdicating our responsibility enshrined in the Constitution, and the folks that elect us want us to be doing this, making sure we're looking over the shoulder of the administrative branch. And let me finish how I started. And I said in the middle, my goal is to do a WRRDA bill every 2 years. And with that, I will yield to Mr. Bishop, who I believe, Mr. Bishop, do you? Oh, Ms. Frankel, I'm sorry, co-author of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the chairs and to the ranking members for this bill. And I believe that this amendment makes it much better. With the widening of the Panama Canal and ship traffic expected through the Suez Canal, ports of this country are in an infrastructure race with the world. 17 years. That's how long it's been taking the Army Corps of Engineers to issue a particular chief's report. This is not how you win a race. And I'm going to use Port Everglades as an example because they have, for 17 years, sponsored a feasibility study to widen and deepen the harbor at Port Everglades from 42 to 50 feet so they can accommodate larger and heavier loaded freight ships. And this is a port that in the past 10 years has contributed $110 million to the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, only getting back 9. And this particular project would spur economic growth in South Florida, creating 7,000 new jobs and an additional 135,000 indirect jobs in Florida. It's a $500 million economic impact, far outweighing its potential costs. And not to be repetitive, did I mention it's taken the Army Corps 17 years and $11 million to complete the study. And now, 17 years later, the Army Corps has promised to issue a chief's report by December of this year. But the Panama Canal is expected to be complete in 2015. And if we have to wait another 2 years for this project to get authorized, or other projects like this to get authorized, we are behind the curve. And so here's the choice. Here's the choice. The post-Panamax vessels and jobs can go to Freeport or Jamaica or even Cuba, because that's where they're going to go, or we can bring them to the United States of America. So I urge my colleagues to support this good amendment. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady, and now Ms. Titus is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank my colleagues from Florida for this amendment because there's a similar situation in Nevada, and I speak in support of it. Under the current language of the bill, the project in northern Nevada that deals with the Truckee Rivers Meadows area outside of Reno, originating in Lake Tahoe, would be stopped in midstream, so to speak, and the Corps and local communities would have to just start all over from scratch. In 1988, Congress passed the Truckee Meadows Flood Control Project, but that project was deferred during the pre-construction engineering and design phase when changes in real estate costs made the project economically infeasible under the Corps' National Economic Development Guidelines. Over the course of the next decade or so, it was restarted several times, but to no avail. They couldn't come up with a plan that the Corps could recommend as NED compliant. Then in 2012, the study was rescoped to focus primarily on flood risk management in basic recreation areas. The primary purpose of the rescoped reevaluation study was to modify the congressionally authorized project so that something could come out that was economically feasible under the guidelines. Now, after 13.5 years of study, the Corps has finally wrapped up its planning efforts, and a final chief's report is scheduled for approval by a Civil Works Review Board on November 14th. This revised plan is economically justified, has an overall benefit to cost of 1.3 to 1, and according to the Corps' schedule, we expect the administration will resubmit the revised project formulation to Congress within the next 6 months. Without this amendment, the progress that we have seen, and it's taken 13 years, but now it's ready to go for approval, will stop, just like many projects across the country, so it will be terminated prematurely. I'm asking for this on behalf of my Republican colleague from Nevada, Congressman Mark Amodei, who represents the district wherein the Truckee Meadows lie. So I would urge your support and appreciate your consideration.
Ms. Napolitano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I rise in support of the Brown Amendment. We have the Los Angeles River Project expected to receive the chief's report pretty soon. And it's not in my district, but it is a very critical and important project for Southern California to provide ecosystem restoration and recreational opportunities along the river. The Brown Amendment will allow for authorization of the Los Angeles River Project, and I urge an aye vote. I yield back.
And Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I said in my opening statement that this is not a perfect bill, and this amendment certainly underlines or highlights an area in which perfection was not achieved. We tried in the bill to have a balance between the Chief's reports that we were authorizing and the projects that we were deauthorizing, so that there's roughly comparability between the new funds that we were proposing be spent and funds that we were going to withdraw. I understand that this amendment has language with respect to an offset, but this would open the door to a great many projects that are in various stages of completion, about to come to the point where Chief's reports would be issues. And I just think that this is going to put us in a position where the balance that we've tried to achieve, we're going to have a hard time maintaining that balance. Now, I know if I were in the position that Ms. Frankel is in or Ms. Brown is in, I would be offering this amendment, and I would be pushing hard for it. I think that's something that we all have to do for the districts we represent. But as I say, in terms of the larger context of the bill, I think this would disrupt the balance, and so I'm going to have to reluctantly, and I do mean reluctantly, oppose this bill. I yield back. Oppose the amendment. I'm sorry.
Thank the gentleman. I recognize Mr. Garamendi from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your efforts on this, and Mr. Bishop and others. But we got a real problem in my district. We have real people that are really threatened with real floods. I think we've seen in Colorado how devastating floods can be, and since I represent over 200 miles of the Sacramento River and I know 1,100 miles of levees, there are real problems. The Corps of Engineers has been seriously stressed in recent years, and most recently in the last several months, with something called sequestration. Projects that were supposed to be moving along quickly and could have met the deadline in this, as stated in the current bill, cannot meet the deadline. They were lined up to be done, but they were delayed. What we have before us in this amendment is an opportunity for those projects that are to be completed within the next year to be authorized. The Chairman, Mr. Shuster, you correctly point out the necessity for us to take action. It seems to me that if we were to approve this amendment, allow it to go forward, we could achieve the balance that Mr. Bishop talked about in many different ways, and we could also achieve the necessity for congressional approval by having an interim process rather than awaiting the next WRRDA bill, which hopefully will be 2 years out, but based upon recent history might be significantly later, and these projects therefore languish. I can imagine several, in fact, I think I could probably write up several interim mechanisms that could be used to allow for review. For example, they'd go forward unless specifically not authorized, or you can turn it around and go the other way. But clearly we could have a hearing next year on these projects that have been lined up for some time, and in the case in my district are really life safety issues. So I would ask for the approval of the amendment and then further work to achieve the goals of Mr. Bishop as well as the
I thank the gentleman, and my goal is, as I said earlier, I've said many times, to do it every Congress, and that would mean that 14 months from now we would be discussing another WRRDA bill, because that's how time flies, and we'll be in the next Congress 14 months or close to that. So that's my goal. In addition to that, after this bill is signed into law, we're going to start working on the next WRRDA bill, looking at Chief's reports and talking to the Corps and the new process we've set up so that stakeholders are out there talking to the Corps, developing these projects to be able to bring to Congress so that we, the elected representatives of the people, keep our constitutional authority. So, again, I appreciate and I respect the author's intention of this, but at this time I would have to oppose the amendment. Any amendments to the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I am going to withdraw the amendment, but I want you all to understand that for us in Florida and around the country, failure is not an option with this. I mean, so we are going to work to move it forward. I appreciate the Big Four, but you have had input from other members. And I love the idea that you want to do this every 2 years, but we can't wait 2 years in Florida. We are 27 members from Florida and around the country, and we want you all to work with us as we move forward. This is just, I mean, we can't, failure is not an option for us. 4 months later, and in the past, we've done it for 2 years. So we're asking for the chief report 1 year. And all we're asking for you all to do is to work with us as we move forward.
I appreciate the gentlelady, and I appreciate her withdrawing. I think I understood she was withdrawing the amendment. I appreciate that.
I am withdrawing, but I'm trying to get some kind of commitment other than
the gentlelady withdraws, and I've said as soon as this gets done, as soon as this bill becomes law, we will start working on the next WRRDA bill. I hope that I've proven by my actions when I first took over the committee, I said it was going to be a bipartisan situation. I hope that I've proven that, so that I hope my word's good with the gentlelady from Florida.
Sir, your word is very good, and I understand bipartisanship, but I don't understand dictatorship. And so I'm saying we need to work together, leadership.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the gentlelady withdrawing. With that, the negotiations with the ranking member and the minority, we're going to change the lineup and go to the Nolan amendment. So, Mr. Nolan, you are recognized for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't commend.
Hold on 1 second, Mr. Nolan. It's not been handed out. I'm sorry. And while we're doing that, would the clerk designate Mr. Nolan's amendment?
Amendment number 18, offered by Mr. Nolan.
Mr. Nolan, proceed, please.
If the clerk would please read the amendments, very short.
Without objection.
If not, I'll read it. Notwithstanding any other provision of the law, no federal requirement that a state indemnify the federal government as a condition of carrying out a water resources development project shall apply if such requirement is incompatible with relevant state law. But before I address that, Mr. Chairman, I started to say I'd be remiss if I didn't commend our committee chair, subcommittee chair, and the ranking members for the bipartisan, nonpartisan effort, collaborative effort that's been put forth here to solve problems, fix things, and get things done. It's the kind of process that has been successful in this country for several hundred years, and the other committees would do well to witness and follow what has happened here. Additionally, it builds a kind of consensus that enables legislative efforts to become law and, as I said, fix things with common sense and getting things done. With regard to my amendment, the Army Corps of Engineers currently requires any non-federal sponsor of any cost-share program to fully indemnify the Army Corps from any liability, other than, the case of a gross negligence by a federal employee. This is an Army Corps requirement for any state agency that signs a formal project participation agreement. Many states cannot sign such an agreement, since it will be regarded as a state agency obligating a state to future appropriations, which violates their state constitutions. In many cases, this problem is resolved through the use of third parties, such as a local watershed district. But this is a recipe for a disaster eventually, and I could go into that if the members of the committee like. The Upper Mississippi River Basin Association has confirmed to me and my staff that this problem exists in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri. While we do not have the final numbers, it's apparent that this provision is a problem affecting the vast majority of states throughout the country. My amendment simply tells the Corps that they cannot impose this requirement when it violates state law. This should allow for reasonable negotiation in these cases and enable all states to participate in Army Corps cost-share programs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. And this is, we were unaware of this amendment prior to this. This is the first we've heard of it. We certainly want to take a look at it, and so we'd like to work with the gentleman to try to solve this. But again, it's the first we've seen it. Mr. Rahal?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with what you've just said, and certainly commend the gentleman from Minnesota for his efforts. And perhaps we can even talk about this further and have some clarification, if not action, before floor consideration of the bill.
Mr. Bishop?
I concur as well, and I hopefully between now and either the floor or conference, we can be able to work on this and try to address the members' concern.
Mr. Nolan, recognized.
With those assurances, for which I am grateful, I will withdraw my amendment and looking forward to working with all of you.
I thank the gentleman for withdrawing his amendment, and we look forward to working with you also. And with that, are there any other amendments? Ms. Frankel is recognized for an amendment. And I believe they're going to pass out the amendment. We don't have this in your folders.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will explain it. I asked unanimous consent for it to be designated as read, and I will explain it. And again, I want to thank the Chair and the Subcommittee Chair and the ranking members for your fine work on this bill, and this amendment will make it even better. This amendment is an authorization that is not an earmark and requires no money. It only requires common sense. And this is an example of, if you look to the right and the left, that saying, you've met the enemy, it's ourselves. Because we have a current outdated law that needs to be changed. The current law prevents states and local governments from exploring foreign sources of sand to replenish their shorelines without the Army Corps first certifying that there are no domestically viable sources of sand. And big surprise, we have tied the Army Corps up in knots for 17 years. I feel like I have the 17-year jinx here. But anyway, but it is a 17-year-old law that really, because of numerous hurricanes, it's a very, very outdated law. And seriously, it is threatening the economy of South Florida, because we have, in Dade and Broward County, run out of usable sand to dredge off our coasts and put back on our beaches. We are depleted. This amendment would lift the restrictions so that the Army Corps can take into account the very many different local and regional conditions that go into finding sand for shore protection. It will probably come as no surprise that Florida is the top travel destination in the world. We have 87 million visitors, $67 billion impact to Florida's economy. I see Mr. Webster. I know you think Disney World is #1, but actually Fort Lauderdale and South Beaches get more visitors than Disney World. And that'll only be true if we can keep our beaches. Listen, beaches do play a big role, and the beaches play not only a role for visitors, obviously, but for shore protection, for protection of property, protection of people, and of the environment. We heard before about water wars. We are now engaged in South Florida in sand wars because the Army Corps has suggested that Miami and Broward get their sand from Port St. Lucie County. Port St. Lucie has said, no, we will not let you have our sand. So we're in sand wars. And some people even suggesting that we grind up the glass to go put on the beaches.
Lord of mercy.
And yes, thank you. You know, but there is a simple solution, and the simple solution is to let us let the Army Corps take a look at getting sand from the Bahamas. And now some people say, oh my goodness, you know, the sand from the Bahamas actually creeps into the waters where the Florida Keys are, and some people might consider that an invasion, you know, a foreign invasion of the sands. I can tell you it is not harmful at all, because the Keys actually is the #1 attraction in South Florida. So listen, I don't want to continue this, other than to say that we've all seen how hurricanes have ravished this country. And the shorelines they're going away. And so this is about, we need our sand. That's what I'm saying. And we could have our sand if we could use some common sense. 17 years is an outdated law. I know, Mr. Chair, what you're going to tell me. So I'm going to be very respectful.
and because I know this it has come late, but here's what I would respectfully say. I will withdraw this amendment, and I would just respectfully ask that you allow me to continue to work with you so we can save South Florida's beaches. Thank you.
I appreciate the gentlelady withdrawing her amendment, and I will commit to working with her on this issue. And with that, I'll yield to Mr. Bishop for a comment, because he and I have been discussing this.
I thank the Chairman for yielding, and I thank Ms. Frankel for offering the amendment. This is an issue that I think has a pretty easy solution, and that is, I mean, this has a long history. WRRDA 86 gave the Corps the authority to use non-domestic stand if domestic stand was not available. In 2007, there was a study, and the Corps basically decided that they couldn't determine whether there was domestic sand available or not. That, to me, is unacceptable. I've spoken to the Chairman about this, and we are committed to dealing with the leadership of the Corps to have them make that determination, and it seems very clear, based on another report that was filed in 2007, that their determination will be that there is not domestic sand, which will then open the door to the use of the sand that is available. So I think we can, I'm confident, not confident, I shouldn't say, I'm optimistic that we can get this resolved in a fashion that falls short of legislation dealing with the Corps itself. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank the gentlelady for withdrawing her amendment. I believe Ms. Brown has a comment.
Oh, I just want to say I support the amendment, but you withdrawn it. But I do support the amendment, and I'm very pleased that we're going to work out a solution.
Thank the gentlelady from Florida. And with that, Mr. Rahal.
Just quickly, Mr. Chairman, appreciate your commitment to work with the Florida delegation on this. I know that the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Frankel, has been very adamant about the Corps not exercising their current authority, and she's talked to me numerous times on this. She's been joined by Debbie Wasserman Schwartz, by Ileana Rose-Layton, and others in the Florida delegation. So we appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your commitment to continue to work with us on this.
Thank you, Mr. Rahal. And with that, are there any other amendments? Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk designate the amendment, and while the clerk is designated, pass out the amendment. I don't believe it's been passed out. Right? Okay. They're passing out the amendment right now. Give us a second there, Mr. Cohen. Designate.
Amendment number 45, offered by Mr. Cohen.
And with that, Mr. Cohen, you can explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'm not going to thank all the members of the committee, because Mr. Waltz said I shouldn't do that and waste that time, so I'm not going to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Waltz, for that good counsel. This is the last amendment.
The Mississippi River is arguably the most important inland waterway in the nation, both in terms of ecological service and our economy. Extending over 2,000 miles along 10 states, the Mississippi is a conduit of commerce supporting over 1 million jobs and directly adding over $100 billion to our economy. The mayors along the Mississippi have worked with me and Congressman Crawford and other members of this committee to improve the ecological and economic health of the waterway, and this amendment is a product of that process. The amendment is offered in the spirit of the bill to reduce redundancy and duplication, streamline efforts, and decrease bureaucratic obstacles to economic performance. My amendment calls for a Mississippi River Management Plan to be placed in Section 219, which I think there has been some changes on that, and this has nothing to do with locks and dams. There are several Mississippi River management efforts being carried out in various sections of the waterway aimed at particular issues for particular industries, but none that creates a platform for a single management approach for the entire mighty Mississippi to help all industries. Such ongoing efforts are all valuable, but only include a portion of the river and only can address certain challenges. We have an opportunity to include directive language that bridges the gaps and takes into account the impacts throughout the mainstream Mississippi. The Mississippi River impacts not only this country but the entire world, as this nation's only trade surplus, which is agricultural goods, is directly dependent on the waterway. 45% of all agricultural goods move up and down the river. 60% of U.S. grain alone goes up and down the river. Well, it goes down the river. Yet the river has no unified plan. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers consistently performs above and beyond the call of duty, even though we consistently do not equip them to carry out their mission. Through this amendment, we are providing the Corps with a tool to help them meet their mission objectives, while at the same time protecting this country's most important inland waterway and developing the economic opportunities for our communities. The Mississippi River drains 31 states, is the lifeline of the most productive agricultural zone on earth, and directly impacts the health of the Gulf. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the opportunity to offer this amendment, and I want you to know during the time that we've debated these other amendments, I've worked quietly among the members on both sides of the aisle, and I have the votes to pass this amendment. But reluctantly, I will withdraw the amendment because I know that the Chairman would prefer that to be the way it goes. And so I will reluctantly withdraw it, but at this time, as I withdraw it and ask for consideration as we go along, I'd like to ask each member to take their water bottle, to untwist it, and join with me in a toast to the Chairman for his great work on the water bill.
I appreciate that very much. He's very good. Cohen, you're good. I appreciate the gentleman withdrawing his amendment and look forward to working with him as we move forward on these really vital issues. Are there any other? Mr. Garamendi wants to have a brief comment, I understand, is the word. That's what the ranking member told me. Is that possible, Mr. Garamendi?
Mr. Chairman, I was going to offer an amendment dealing with the crediting issue. You've made good progress on this. We'd like to push it just a little bit further along. The way the current crediting, it does advance the opportunity for local agencies to engage their projects earlier and to begin to solve some of their, in this case, flood issues. We'd like to advance that. I would like to have it advanced a little further so that projects that were earlier in the process could move forward with the crediting. Right now, the cutoff line really eliminates some of the critical flood control projects that I have in my district from getting to the point of working with the Corps. I know it's not going to pass, so I'm not going to offer it, but I'd like to work with you as you move forward. I assume there will be a conference committee at some point, and perhaps I can persuade my senator to take up this issue in a little more broad-minded way than she has in the past.
I appreciate you not offering it, and we'll work with you on it. I think Mr. Denham has
just a point of inquiry. I did not have that in my packet. I was wondering when this amendment was filed.
No, we didn't. He doesn't have an amendment. He just talked about an amendment that he did not file. Yes. So thank you, Mr. Denham.
Can I have a few minutes to talk about an amendment that I'm not going to file?
If you insist upon it, Mr. Denham, that would. I appreciate, well, okay, so no more amendments? That have or have not been filed? No more amendments. I recognize Mr. Gibbs for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 3080 as amended be approved and reported favorably to the House.
The question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and ordered favorably to the House. I ask unanimous consent that each bill reported today will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute incorporating any amendments adopted without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make all necessary technical, clarifying, and conforming changes to each of the bills reported today to reflect the actions of the committee without objection, so ordered. I ask the unanimous consent that the chairman offer, after consultation with the ranking member, have authority to strike or revise any provisions of any of the bills reported today that would cause a sequential referral to other committee, or that cause the bill to be subject to a Budget Act or Rule 21 cut-go point of order without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the committee authorize the chairman or his designee to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on the following bills that were reported to the committee today or similar Senate bills: H.R. 3096, H.R. 3095, and H.R. 3080 as amended. Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Rule 5 of the Rules of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the chair notes the presence of a quorum for actions taken on the committee business today. The committee is adjourned.